This tutorial will be a basic review of keyframe animation using the timeline at the bottom of the user interface. I'm going to animate the pieces on this creature, and then at the end I'm going to introduce the IK kinematics and the bones to articulate the little arm on the top of his head as an out tutorial sample. I'm going to start with a wing. Now I've gone in and I've named all the pieces that I might want to animate. There's prop, there's wing 1, there's wing 2, and the legs. All right, so anything that I think I'm going to animate, I gave it a name. And then I selected everything and I made it into a group. Once I've done that, I'm going to select the wing that I want to animate first. I'm putting my playback head at the beginning of my timeline, and I'm going to identify the axes on which I want to rotate this element. And for this wing, it's going to be the z-axis. So I'm going to set a keyframe in the channels window in the upper right-hand corner. I'm going to right-click on Rotate Z and choose Key Selected. I'm going to tip it a little bit because I want this to be a flapping kind of a cycle. So I'm just going to start with it down at an angle like this. I'm now going to go to frame 25. And I'm using even numbers so that if I create a cycle for each of these animated components, it'll make it easier to loop it in After Effects seamlessly without having to render out a long animation inside of Maya. So at frame 25, I'm going to tip it up in the opposite direction. Now, in order for this to be a complete cycle, I have to take the very first keyframe at frame 1 and copy and paste it to frame 50 if I want it to be kind of a smooth, seamless animation. So I'm going to go down to the timeline. I'm going to hold my Shift key and drag through until the keyframe reference, which is a red line, is yellow. Now I can right-click and I can choose Copy. I'm going to put my playback at frame 50, and then I'm going to right-click and I'm going to choose Paste and Paste. And now if I was to drag through, I have a complete cycle. Now, if I want to, I could select these keyframes in the graph editor. So if you don't see the graph editor on your shelf, you can go to Window, and you can go to Animation Editors, and the very first choice is the graph editor. And if you recall, we were able to select that function, Rotate Z, and then go to Curves, Post-Infinity Cycle. And what that will accomplish is that if I drag through the timeline now, it repeats that function, even though the keyframes don't go beyond 50 frames. Now I'm going to animate the other wing similarly to this. So I'm going to go back to the beginning, and I'm going to go to my front view because in my front view I can get the angles pretty close to identical. So I'll select the other wing, and I'll go over to my channel window, right-click on Rotate Z, click on Key Selected, and I'm going to tip it down at about the same angle. Now I'll go to 25. At 25, I'll tip it up to the similar angle of the previous wing. And then I'm going to shift and drag through the very first keyframe, again checking to make sure it is now yellow. I will right-click, choose Copy. Then I will go to frame 50, and I will right-click and choose Paste, Paste. Now all I need to do is repeat that cycle with the graph editor. So I'll go to the graph editor again, and in the graph editor I will choose the word Rotate Z in the graph editor, and then I will go to Curves, Post-Infinity, Cycle. So now if I was to play that animation, it will play for the duration of the amount of frames that I happen to export. Next, I'm going to animate the propeller at the back. If I click on it now and I select it and I turn it on this axis, I can see over in the y-axis that it is exactly where I want to rotate this. I'm going to zero out the point at which the propeller starts to rotate, so I can introduce a 360-degree rotation. So I'll put in 0 for rotate Y, and with my playback head at the beginning of the timeline, I'll right-click on the rotate Y and choose key selected. I'm going to go to frame 25, and I'm going to change it to 360. So between 1 and 25, I have 1 cycle. And now I'm going to have it rotate indefinitely. So I'll go to the graph editor, and I'll select rotate Y, and then I'm going to go to curves, post infinity, cycle. And I'm going to go to my side view just to confirm it's doing what I want. And as I pass through and by frame 25, I can see that it continues to rotate. Next, we're going to animate one leg, and then I'll let you do the rest. And then once we return, we'll deal with that articulating arm that we will use to kind of zap or try to zap the adversary. I'm selecting the leg, and I'm identifying the axis on which it will rotate. And for my model, it's the red one or the X. And I'm going to do the same thing I've done all along with the other elements. I'm going to go to frame 1, and I'm going to set keyframe rotate X, key selected in the channel window. We'll go to frame 25 again, and I'm going to move it. And then I'm going to shift and drag through the first keyframe, right-click, choose copy, and I'm going to go to 50, right-click, and choose paste. So now if I was to drag through, I've got that complete cycle, and then if I go to my graph editor, I can now select rotate X, curves, post infinity, cycle. Now I'm going to do the other 3 legs, and when we return they will be done, and we will address the appendage up here.